The stadium was packed with proud families. Cheers echoed through the air as students crossed the stage one by one. Marlon stood near the edge of the crowd, holding a small bouquet of yellow flowers. He wore a dark gray gown, not for ceremony, but because the school had given one to each parent who played a role in a student's success. His short, dark brown hair was neatly trimmed, and his hands gripped the flowers a little too tightly. He was waiting for Emily. Emily was the daughter of Marlon's wife, Sarah. She wasn't his by blood, but he had helped raise her since she was 5. Now at 18, she was graduating high school. Marlon had been there through everything. Scraped knees, bedtime stories, school plays, and teenage mood swings. He had paid for her field trips, stayed up during her fevers, and practiced college interviews with her. He thought today would be special, the day she'd look at him and say, "We did it." As Emily's name was called, the crowd around Marlon cheered. He stepped up a little, smiling wide, raising his phone to get a picture. She walked across the stage in a pink gown, her black shoes clicking against the floor. Her medium-length light brown hair moved gently as she waved toward the crowd. Marlon waved back, thinking she saw him. But then, as she walked off the stage, she looked in another direction. A man in a sharp blue pant coat and white shirt stood just a few feet away. His short blonde hair was brushed back, and he held a shiny balloon that said, "Congrats, grad." He shouted her name and opened his arms. Emily's face lit up. Without a second thought, she ran right to him. Marlon froze. He stood still as he watched Emily throw her arms around the man, her biological father, Chris. Marlon hadn't known he was coming. Chris hadn't been around much over the years. There were long gaps with no calls, missed birthdays, and broken promises. But today, here he was, smiling for pictures and being introduced to Emily's friends. No one noticed Marlon standing just a few steps away. He lowered his phone and looked down at the flowers in his hand. He hadn't brought balloons or gifts, just flowers and 10 years of memories that suddenly felt invisible. He wanted to believe she would turn around, that she'd say, "Come here, Marlon," and introduce him too. But she didn't. She laughed at something Chris said and pulled him into another hug. Marlon stood there for another moment, not sure whether to stay or walk away. All around him, families were hugging, crying, and taking pictures. The moment that was supposed to be shared with him had passed, and he was still holding the flowers. Marlon sat in his car in the school parking lot, still holding the flowers. The graduation ceremony had ended, but the feeling in his chest had not. He watched as other families laughed, took pictures, and walked to their cars. He saw Emily again from a distance. She was still with Chris, her biological father. They were smiling together like they had never lost time. He didn't hate Chris. He didn't even know him well. But he remembered all the times Chris wasn't there, and all the times he, Marlon, was. When Sarah and Marlon met, she was a single mom. Emily and her younger brother, Jake, were shy around Marlon at first. They didn't understand why someone new was in their lives. But Marlon never rushed anything. He showed up every day, little by little. He'd take them to school, help with their homework, and cook dinner on nights Sarah worked late. The kids started to depend on him. They'd ask him to come to parent-teacher meetings. They'd call him when they were scared or sick. Jake once asked Marlon to teach him how to throw a football because he said, "You're better at it than my real dad." Marlon never corrected them when they called him by his first name instead of Dad. He figured love didn't need labels. He gave rides to weekend games, clapped at every school play, and stayed up late when they needed help with projects. He knew their favorite foods, favorite shows, and the way they both liked to be comforted when they were upset. He was part of their everyday life. Chris, on the other hand, would call every few months, maybe send a birthday message or a gift in the mail. Sometimes he wouldn't show up when he said he would. Other times, he'd make a big promise and forget about it. Sarah had given up trying to explain it to the kids, but Marlon always tried to be enough for them. He never wanted them to feel like they were missing something. He wasn't perfect. There were days he got tired, times he made mistakes, but he never stopped showing up. When Jake broke his arm in middle school, Marlon sat beside him the whole night in the emergency room. When Emily got rejected from her first college choice, Marlon took her out for ice cream and told her she was still going to do amazing things. Now, watching her hug Chris like the past 10 years hadn't happened, Marlon felt a quiet pain. He didn't want credit. He didn't want praise. But he thought, at the very least, he'd be seen. He looked down at the flowers in his lap and sighed. The petals were a little bent now. He started the car and slowly pulled out of the parking lot, still thinking about the little girl who used to run to him when she needed anything, and the young woman who now ran to someone else. Chris had not planned to come to the graduation. For years, he had stayed away, choosing work and distance over family. But when Sarah called a week before the ceremony, something changed. She told him Emily and Jake were graduating, and that this might be the last big moment he could share with them before they went to college and started their own lives. He bought a plane ticket the next day. He packed a small bag and dressed carefully for the event. Chris wore a blue pant coat and a crisp white shirt. His short blonde hair was neat, and he wanted to make a good impression. He had gifts for the kids, balloons, a few presents, and a card he'd written, hoping it would explain everything he hadn't said in years. When he arrived at the stadium, he felt nervous. He wasn't sure how the kids would react. Would they even want to see him? But as soon as he stepped into the crowd, he saw Emily and Jake waiting by the stage. They looked taller and more confident than the last time he saw them. Emily wore a pink gown and black shoes, her medium-length light brown hair shining under the stadium lights. Jake was in a dark suit, looking proud but a little shy. Chris called out to them, waving the balloons and smiling. Emily's face lit up like the sun. She dropped her phone and ran to him. Jake followed, glancing over at Marlon, who stood quietly nearby. For Chris, the moment was overwhelming. He felt a mix of joy and guilt. He hadn't been there for many birthdays, school events, or family dinners. But now, holding his children close, he promised himself he would try harder. He smiled for pictures, hugged their friends, and talked loudly, making sure everyone saw he was back. People asked questions, and he answered carefully, trying not to stir up old feelings. He wanted this day to be about celebration, not conflict. When Sarah found him later, she thanked him quietly, but warned him that Marlon was feeling left out. Chris nodded, knowing the truth. He wished things could be different, but today was about the kids. Chris didn't notice Marlon's quiet pain. The man who had been there through everything was standing alone, watching from the sidelines. Marlon's presence was steady, but invisible. After the ceremony, Chris spent time with the kids, making plans for dinner and the weekend. He talked about college and future trips. Emily and Jake listened carefully, soaking up the attention they had missed for so long. Marlon left early. The car was quiet as he drove away, the flowers still on the seat next to him. He didn't want to spoil their reunion, but the silence in his heart was loud. He wondered if Chris really understood what it meant to be a father. For Marlon, it was more than showing up once in a while. It was about being there every day. But today, that part of the story felt forgotten. And even though the crowd cheered around him, Marlon felt alone. As Emily walked off the stage, her pink gown flowing behind her, Marlon took a step forward, holding the small bouquet of yellow flowers tightly in his hand. He smiled, ready to give her the flowers he had carefully picked that morning. He wanted to see the pride in her eyes, to hear her say thank you. But before he could call her name, Emily spotted Chris across the crowded bleachers. Chris, dressed in a blue pant coat and white shirt, was waving enthusiastically, his short blonde hair shining in the sun. He had balloons in one hand and a big smile on his face. Without hesitation, Emily's eyes lit up, and she turned away from Marlon. Her black shoes clicked quickly against the concrete as she ran toward Chris. Marlon's smile faded. He watched helplessly as Emily threw her arms around her biological father. Marlon stood still, the flowers hanging loosely in his hand. The crowd around them buzzed with excitement and noise, but he felt completely silent. The moment he had imagined for years was slipping away. He noticed Jake nearby, also moving toward Chris, but looking back once at Marlon with a conflicted expression. Jake's small hand reached for Chris's balloon, and the three of them laughed together. The sight made Marlon's heart ache. He remembered the times when Jake had learned to ride his bike, with Marlon's steady hands holding the seat. He thought about all the school projects he had helped Emily with late into the night. None of it mattered now, at least not in this moment. People around Marlon smiled and cheered as if nothing had changed. They congratulated Chris for coming back, and some even whispered that it was good for the kids to reconnect with their father. But Marlon felt invisible. He took a deep breath and looked down at the bouquet again. The petals were still fresh, but he was no longer sure who they were for. He wished Emily could see him as someone who had loved her every day, not just as a stranger standing alone. Marlon moved away slowly, blending into the crowd. He didn't want to cause a scene or make anyone uncomfortable. His love wasn't about attention or recognition. It was about being there, even when it was hard. He found a quiet spot by the exit and watched from a distance. Emily and Chris posed for pictures, and she laughed brightly, holding the balloons he had bought. Marlon wanted to reach out, to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he pulled out his phone and took a photo of the empty spot where he had hoped to stand beside her. It was a photo no one would see, a memory only he would keep. As the ceremony ended and families began to leave, Marlon stayed for a few more minutes. He wanted to believe that love wasn't about who ran to you first, but who stayed by your side the longest. Then, quietly, he turned and walked away, still holding the flowers. Marlon stood quietly near the bleachers, his hand still holding the small bouquet of yellow flowers. He watched the celebration all around him. Families hugged tightly. Friends took pictures, and laughter filled the air. But Marlon felt like he was outside the party, a guest no one had invited. Emily was still with Chris, her biological father. They were talking to friends, laughing, and taking selfies with balloons. Jake was nearby, leaning into Chris's side, smiling and looking happy. Marlon's heart tightened. He glanced down at the flowers, now a little crushed from his tight grip. They were meant for Emily, a small gift to celebrate her big day. But now, they felt like a symbol of how invisible he had become. Around him, other parents cheered loudly and wiped tears from their eyes. Some called out to their children, waiting to take them home. Marlon didn't move. He stayed still, feeling the space between himself and the kids growing bigger. He thought about all the mornings he woke up early to make breakfast, all the nights he sat by Emily's bedside when she was sick. He remembered driving Jake to soccer games and sitting through hours of school plays. Every moment had been real, filled with love and care. But now, in this crowd, it was like those moments didn't count. Marlon looked up and saw Sarah approaching. She gave him a small, sad smile. "They're happy," she said quietly. "It's a good day for them." Marlon nodded, but the words didn't reach his heart. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that love wasn't about who was there first, but who was there always. He turned his gaze back to Emily. She caught sight of him and hesitated for a moment. Then she smiled politely and waved. It wasn't the warm welcome Marlon had hoped for, but it was enough. The stadium began to empty as the sun moved lower in the sky. Marlon stayed a little longer, watching families leave together. He noticed some kids hugging their step-parents, some saying goodbye to single parents. He wondered if they felt the same invisible pain he did. Finally, Marlon took a deep breath and started to walk away. He kept the flowers in his hand, a quiet reminder of the day. As he left the stadium, he thought about the kind of father he wanted to be. Not one who demanded attention, but one who loved without expecting anything in return. He knew that sometimes love wasn't seen or thanked, but it was always there. He started his car and looked in the rearview mirror. The stadium lights faded behind him. And even though he felt alone, Marlon promised himself he wouldn't stop showing up. Because being a father wasn't about standing in the spotlight. It was about being there, no matter what. As Marlon drove home that evening, his mind was filled with memories. The small bouquet of yellow flowers still sat on the passenger seat, untouched. The quiet car made room for the thoughts and feelings that had been building inside him all day. He thought about the first time he met Emily and Jake. They were shy and unsure around him. It wasn't easy at first. Emily would hide behind her mother, and Jake didn't want to talk much. But Marlon didn't give up. He knew building trust took time. Over the years, they had shared so much. He remembered teaching Jake how to throw a football in the park. Jake had laughed when Marlon missed the catch, and Marlon laughed right back. He remembered staying up late helping Emily study for her science tests. Sometimes they got frustrated, but they always finished together. Marlon remembered being there on tough days too. Like the time Emily was sick with the flu and didn't want to eat. He made her favorite soup and sat beside her until she felt better. Or the night Jake was nervous before a big game, and Marlon told him that winning wasn't everything. Trying his best was what mattered most. All those moments were real, even if today they seemed forgotten. He thought about Chris, the biological father. Chris had come back today, after years away. Marlon didn't blame him for missing so much. Life was complicated, but Marlon knew one thing. Love wasn't about being there only when it was easy or convenient. It was about showing up every day, even when no one noticed. As the miles passed under the wheels, Marlon felt a quiet strength growing inside him. He had given the kids something that no one could take away: steady love and support. He had been their constant, their protector, their guide. When he pulled into the driveway, Sarah was waiting at the door. She looked tired but smiled when she saw him. "How was graduation?" she asked softly. Marlon didn't answer right away. Instead, he held up the bouquet. "These were for Emily," he said quietly. "She didn't take them." Sarah nodded, her eyes shining. "They're still hers," she said. "She loves you, Marlon, even if today didn't show it." Marlon smiled a little. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that love wasn't always perfect or easy to see. Later that night, Marlon sat in his chair with a photo album. Pictures of family trips, birthdays, and school events filled the pages. There were pictures of him with Emily and Jake, laughing, hugging, and just being together. He touched one photo of Emily's first day of school. She was holding his hand tightly, her eyes wide with curiosity. Marlon smiled and whispered, "I'll always be here." Even if today was hard, those memories reminded him why he stayed. Because being a father was not just about one day. It was about every day, the good ones and the tough ones. And no matter what happened at the graduation, Marlon knew his love was real. And that was enough. A few days after the graduation, Marlon and Sarah sat together at their kitchen table. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Marlon still carried the weight of that day with him, but he wanted to talk. "Sarah," he began carefully, "do you think Emily really sees me as part of her family?" Sarah looked down at her hands before answering. "She loves you, Marlon. But today was confusing for her too. Chris coming back after all this time, it stirred up a lot of feelings." Marlon nodded slowly. "I just want her to know how much I care. Not just as someone who's there sometimes, but as her dad." "She knows," Sarah said softly. "You've been her dad for years. But sometimes biology matters to kids, even when it shouldn't. It's hard for her to understand everything." They both fell silent for a moment. Marlon thought about the times he had felt invisible at school events and family gatherings. He wondered if Emily struggled with those feelings too. "Maybe," Marlon said finally. "We need to give her time. She's growing up, and this is all new for her." Sarah smiled a little. "Time and patience. That's what helped me too." Marlon reached for the bouquet of flowers still sitting on the counter. I was going to give these to her on graduation day. I guess I'll save them for another time. She'll love that, Sarah said, because it's from you. They talked more about the future, about college plans, family dinners, and how to help Emily and Jake feel safe and loved no matter what happened. Marlon realized that even though today's moment had been painful, it didn't erase the years of love he had given. It didn't erase the nights he stayed up worrying or the mornings he made breakfast. It was just one part of a bigger story. As the sun set outside, Marlon felt a little lighter. He knew there would be more hard days ahead, but also many good ones. And through it all, he would keep showing up. Because being a father wasn't about perfect moments. It was about staying, no matter what. And Marlon was ready to stay. Weeks after the graduation, the house felt different. There was a quiet energy in the air, a mix of change and hope. Marlon stood in the living room watching Emily and Jake pack for their new chapters in college and high school. The kids were busy, but Marlon noticed how they still looked to him for support. One evening, Emily came over to Marlon with a small smile. She held out her hand, taking the bouquet of yellow flowers he had saved since graduation. "Thank you," she said softly. Marlon felt a warmth spread inside. It was a small moment, but it meant the world. "I'm sorry about the day," Emily added. "It was hard, with everything happening. But I'm glad you stayed." Marlon smiled back, feeling proud. "I'm always here, no matter what." Chris called sometimes now. He talked about visits and future plans with the kids. Marlon listened without jealousy. He knew there was room in their lives for more than one kind of love. What mattered was that Emily and Jake felt supported and safe. Sarah and Marlon worked together to build a stronger family. They planned dinners, movie nights, and helped the kids with their schoolwork. It wasn't always perfect. Sometimes old feelings came up, and everyone needed space. But they kept trying. Marlon understood that being a stepfather wasn't about replacing anyone. It was about adding love and stability, no matter how complicated things got. One afternoon, as Emily practiced her graduation speech for college, Marlon sat nearby, listening. Her words were about family, strength, and love. When she finished, she looked at him and said, "Thank you for believing in me." Marlon's eyes filled with tears, but he smiled. That's what family does. He realized that love wasn't about perfect moments or who was there first. It was about who stayed through the ups and downs, who showed up when it mattered most. And Marlon was ready to keep showing up, for Emily, for Jake, for Sarah, and for the family they were becoming. Because family wasn't just about blood, it was about heart. And Marlon's heart was full.